Chapter 5. Winn-Dixie couldn't stand to be left alone. We found that out real quick. If me and the preacher went off and left him by himself in the trailer, he'd pull all the cushions off the couch and all the toilet paper off the roll. So we started tying him up outside with a rope when we left. That didn't work either. Winn-Dixie howled until Samuel, Mrs. Detweiler's dog, started howling too. It was exactly the kind of noise that people in all adult trailer parks did not like to hear. He just doesn't want to be left alone, I told the preacher. That's all, let's take him with us. I couldn't understand the way that Winn-Dixie felt. Getting left behind probably made his heart feel empty. After a while, the preacher gave in, and everywhere he went, we took Winn-Dixie, even to church. The Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi isn't a regular-looking church. The building used to be a Pick It Quick store. And when you walk in the front door, the first thing you see is a Pick It Quick motto. It's written on the floor in tiny little red tiles that make great big letters that say, Pick, 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 quick, quick, quick. The preacher tried painting over those tiles, but the letters won't stay covered up, and so the preacher had just given up and let them be. The other thing about the Open Arms is that it's different from other churches. There aren't any pews. People bring in their own fold-up chairs and lawn chairs, and sometimes it looks more like a congregation is watching a parade or sitting at a barbecue instead of being at church. It's kind of a strange church, I thought. Winn-Dixie would fit right in. But the first time we brought Winn-Dixie to the Open Arms, the preacher tried to tie him outside the front door. Why did we bring him all the way here just to tie him up? I asked the preacher. Because dogs don't belong in church, Opal, the preacher said. That's why. He tied Winn-Dixie up to a tree, and said how there was lots of shade for him and how he ought to work out real good. Well, it didn't. The service started, and there was some singing and some sharing and some praying, and then the preacher started preaching. And he wasn't but 2 or 3 words into his sermon when there was a terrible howl coming from outside. The preacher tried to ignore it. Today, ow, said Winn-Dixie. Please, said the preacher. Ow, ow, said Winn-Dixie back. Friends, said the preacher. Ow, wailed Winn-Dixie. Everyone turned in their lawn chairs and fold-up chairs and looked at one another. Opal, said the preacher. Ow, said Winn-Dixie. Yes, sir, I said. Get that dog, he yelled. Yes, sir, I yelled back. I went outside and untied Winn-Dixie and brought him inside, and he sat down beside me and smiled up at the preacher, and the preacher couldn't help it. He smiled back. Winn-Dixie had that effect on him. And so the preacher started in preaching again. Winn-Dixie sat there listening to it, wiggling his ears this way and that, trying to catch all the words, and everything would have been all right, except a mouse ran across the floor. The Open Arms had mice. They were there from when it was a Pick It Quick, and there were lots of good things to eat in the building. And when the Pick It Quick became the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi, the mice stayed around to eat all the leftover crumbs from the potluck suppers. The preacher kept on saying he was going to have to do something about them, but he never did. Because the truth is, he couldn't stand the thought of hurting anything, even a mouse. Well, Winn-Dixie saw that mouse, and he was up and after him. One minute, everything was quiet and serious, and the preacher was going on and on and on. And the next minute, Winn-Dixie looked like a furry bullet shooting across the building, chasing that mouse. He was barking, his feet were skidding all over the polished Pick It Quick floor, and people were clapping and hollering and pointing. They really went wild when Winn-Dixie actually caught the mouse. I have never in my life seen a dog catch a mouse, said Mrs. Nordley. She was sitting right next to me. He's a special dog, I told her. I imagine so, she said back. Winn-Dixie stood up there in front of the whole church, wagging his tail and holding the mouse real careful in his mouth, holding on to him tight, but not squishing him. I believe that mutt has got some retriever in him, said someone behind me. That's a hunting dog. Winn-Dixie took the mouse over to the preacher and dropped it at his feet. And when the mouse tried to get away, Winn-Dixie put his paw right on the mouse's tail. Then he smiled up at the preacher. He showed him all his teeth. The preacher looked down at the mouse. He looked at Winn-Dixie. He looked at me. He rubbed his nose. It got real quiet in that Pick-It-Quick. "Let us pray," the preacher finally said, "for this mouse." And everyone started laughing and clapping. The preacher picked up the mouse by the tail and walked and threw it out the front door of the Pick-It-Quick, and everybody applauded again. Then he came back and we all prayed together. I prayed for my mama. I told God how much she would have enjoyed hearing the story of Winn-Dixie catching that mouse. It would have made her laugh. I asked God if maybe I could be the one to tell her that story someday. And then I talked to God about how I was lonely in Naomi, because I didn't know how many kids. I didn't know that many kids, only the ones from church. And there weren't that many kids at the Open Arms, just Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry, two brothers who weren't twins, but they looked like they were. And Amanda Wilkinson, whose face was always pinched up like she was smelling something real bad. And Sweetie Pie Thomas, who was only 5 years old and still mostly a baby. And none of them wanted to be my friend anyway, because they probably thought I'd tell on them to the preacher for every little thing they did wrong, and they would get in trouble with God and their parents. So I told God that I was lonely, even having Winn-Dixie. And finally, I prayed for that mouse. Like the preacher suggested, I prayed that he didn't get hurt when he was flying out the door in the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. I prayed that he didn't get hurt when he was flying out the door of the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. I prayed that he landed on a nice soft patch of grass. So how is Opal feeling at the end of chapter 5?